Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, an almanac of garden history, literature, and small botanical joys. I'm Jennifer Ebling, and today is February 19th. Some days, the garden is a refuge, and some days, it's a classroom. Not the kind with desks, the kind with evidence. Today's stories belong to people who made science feel near, close enough to hold in your hands, close enough to use. They showed that the living world isn't too complex. It's just been waiting for someone to pay attention. Here's today's garden history. It was on this day in 1812 that Andrew Dickson Murray was born. Andrew lived in that Victorian moment when gardens became places of study, not only beauty, but belonging. At the Royal Horticultural Society, he helped shape a shared way of seeing plants, one that still feels familiar today. At Cambridge, he helped design what were called systematic beds, a living map of plant families you could walk through, learning botanical relationships with your feet. Andrew had a particular fascination, conifers, evergreens with long memories. He named and described trees that would become staples, including the California red fir, Abies magnifica, and the Port Orford cedar, Chamaecyparis lawsoniana. But here's the quieter part of his legacy. Andrew didn't just want gardens to look impressive. He wanted them to be legible, so a gardener could understand what they were growing and why it behaved the way it did. Andrew didn't separate science from wonder. For him, naming was a form of care. To understand a plant was to give it a place in the garden and in the mind. And it was on this day in 1839 that Alpheus Spring Packard Jr. was born. Alpheus was part of an early wave of scientists who took insects seriously, not as background noise, but as a living system threading through crops and gardens. He wrote guides meant for real people, for fruit growers, farmers, and gardeners, the kind of books that helped you stop guessing and start noticing which insects belonged and which caused harm. In one dedication, he wrote to a fellow naturalist that they had been drawn together by, quote, a common love for insects and their ways. That phrase still feels tender, like a reminder that careful attention can be a form of friendship. Even during the Civil War, Alpheus kept collecting insects on the march, as if his mind couldn't help itself, as if the world was always offering specimens, always offering clues. And what he was really doing was translating, taking the complicated life of the garden and giving it names we could live with, words we could use, knowledge we could apply, making gardeners feel more confident when something chewed, mottled, or failed. In today's Unearthed Words, we hear an excerpt from the no-nonsense gardener Ruth Stout from her book, How to Have a Green Thumb Without an Aching Back. Ruth wrote about late winter days like this one, when you go out to the garden, not to do anything, just to see, just to check if the ground has softened, just to feel, quote, the cheer of it. It's a small thing, really, but gardeners know sometimes hope looks exactly like that. A quick walk, a glance at the soil, a quiet return, and a better sense of how much longer you need to wait. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Living Soil Handbook by Jessie Frost. This is a book that treats soil as a living community, not something to conquer, but something to work with. Jessie returns to 3 steady principles. Disturb the soil as little as possible, keep it covered as much as possible, and keep it planted as much as possible. But what gardeners tend to trust most is his tone. He writes about what worked and what didn't. Because soil is complicated, gardening is too. But the work isn't about control. It's about learning how to listen. And finally, here's something sweet to ignite the little botanic spark in your heart. It was on this day in 1849 that Frances Hodgson Burnett was born, the beloved English author. Frances didn't just write about garden restoration, she lived it. In Kent, at Great Maytham Hall, she found an old, neglected walled rose garden hidden behind an ivy-covered gate and brought it back with the help of a head gardener and of Robin, who seemed to monitor their progress. She once wrote that she didn't own the robin owned her. Or perhaps they owned each other. It's such a garden truth. We think we're the ones tending, and then a small wild thing arrives and quietly rearranges the heart. The garden gave Frances something she needed. Not distraction, but steadiness, and a way to move through her grief after the loss of her boy. She wrote about the strange happiness of simply being there, a physical feeling, as if something were pulling at her chest, making her breathe more fully. She set up an outdoor writing space right by the roses, and from that place the secret garden flowed, almost as if it had been waiting. To Frances, the real secret was never the hidden door, but the willingness to step through it again and again and again. As we close the show today, remember, some people don't explain the world. They embrace it as it is, long enough to notice a pattern, long enough to give something a name, long enough to look for signs of cheer, or to open the door one more time. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.